Hello, this is Amy Brown, Director of Events and Education for Trade Press Media Group and Facilities Healthcare Today. Thanks for joining us for today's webcast, Creating Operational Efficiencies with a Mobile Workforce. Our main presenter today is Josh Malgobot, the Senior Director of Healthcare and Dude Solutions. Josh has worked with over 1,000 healthcare organizations and senior living communities in the US, Canada, and UK throughout his career. He specializes in operational challenges unique to healthcare and offers a rare perspective on strategies to improve productivity, mitigate risk, and achieve compliance. Josh will also be joined today, hopefully, by Shamika Holliday and Joel Reel. I know Shamika is based out of Louisiana, so we're hoping she can join us today. Today's webcast learning objectives include learning how to optimize staff time and increase productivity, streamline environmental care rounds and ensure compliance, improve interdepartment communication, and discuss how to create efficiencies with cloud-based mobile technology. Before we get started with today's webcast, I'd like to go over just a few details. A live question and answer session will follow today's presentation. To submit questions, please navigate to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type in questions. Our panelists will answer as many questions as time permits. Today's event will also include a multiple choice polling question. This will pop up on your screen, and your input in these questions is greatly appreciated. At a conclusion of today's webcast, you'll receive a copy of a PDF of today's presentation slides, and you'll also receive a link to take a brief online assessment, and upon successful completion of that assessment, you'll receive your CEU certification. Today's webcast will also be archived at healthcarefacilitiestoday.com. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate the introduction. Looking forward to sharing with everyone some of the work we've been doing with these two great organizations that you're about to learn more about. Just to kick us off, let me make sure that I have my perfect. I can actually move slides around, so we're in a good place. Today, we are joined by, hopefully, Shamika. She is excuse me. So Shamika works with Our Lady of the Lake Regional Medical Centers, part of the Franciscan Missionaries down in Louisiana. They are a leading healthcare innovator, both in Louisiana and Mississippi. They have about 1,747 beds across 10 hospitals, almost 11 full-time staff. Shamika works with the Baton Rouge market they have there, which is about 3 hospitals and 4 million square feet of space. So with our hurricane there visiting, she is going to be trying to dial in, but may not be able to make it. If she doesn't, I have all of her notes, so I will do my best impersonation of her, talking through what their learnings have been on mobile. We are also today joined by Joe from Vidant Medical Center. He's been with Vidant for 22 years, has a unique perspective as someone who actually started as a frontline technician, working on, I think it was the 3rd shift, Joe, has progressed through his career, now runs basically the operations side as a quality technician, and has worked extensively with us on deploying a mobile solution for all of his team members there. Vidant itself is a nonprofit health system that serves about 1.4 million people across 29 counties in eastern North Carolina. They have about 13,000 employees, 1,700 beds across 8 hospitals, with also a home health, hospice, and wellness center. Joe, I'm really happy to have him here, as he brings a perspective of someone who's both done the work, trained people, and managed. So he's going to give us some unique insights. In terms of myself, I'm Josh Malgobot, as Amy introduced. I work with an organization called Dude Solutions. We created the Works Hub, which is operational software built specifically for healthcare. This is kind of why we're involved in this webinar. We have built out solutions for both these organizations to allow them to go mobile with their workforce. We work with about 2,000 healthcare clients. We've got over 435,000 users. We're processing millions of work orders a month. At this point, our history has about 82 million work orders in there. And we're talking billions of dollars worth of assets that are tracked. So for today, we're talking about creating operational efficiencies with a mobile workforce. Great title. Some people might scratch their head and say, okay, well, why is this an issue? What's going on? So to start, I'll give you some background on essentially why we put this presentation together, where we see the value coming from, and why we've pulled together two great resources in Shamika, or at least Shamika's notes, and Joe. And we'll talk a little bit about how we're going to go about this. So first off, in terms of why this topic. So for those of you who may have joined us at ASHI earlier this month or have talked with us over the last number of years, one common theme we found is that a lot of plant directors, facilities directors, coordinators are still talking about going mobile. Everyone knows that within healthcare, there's challenges around budgets, around staffing, around training, around workload management. When you compound that with the fact that our hospitals across the country are aging, average ages are going up every year, nowhere has the adage of do more with less been less overused than in healthcare. We're constantly confronted with this. So with that reality, one of the things that we've been really surprised of in the last year has been that the adoption of simple solutions like mobile as a way to streamline the workflow for hospitals, a way to increase the volume of work that can be happened while at the same time shortening response times without increasing staff, is often overlooked or not fully deployed. Mobile technologies for healthcare facilities have generally been something that when they're picked up, aren't fully adopted or are using, let's say, older technology that might be a little frustrating. So with that in mind, we really wanted to look into what some of the barriers were. And what we found was, one, solutions weren't always easy to use. And the other was that staff aren't always fully trained or bought in. So in terms of how to help hospitals overall confront this and find those efficiencies, we know that a sales pitch from one of our team probably isn't what's needed. A white paper might be helpful, but it's not going to have the same impact as hearing from people actually in the field who have gone through this. So with that in mind, we've pulled Joe and Shamika together to share their insights into essentially how they've rolled out a mobile solution, what the impact was. We're going to get some tips from them on how they would suggest others go through it, best practices, things like that. They've got, again, that unique perspective of having both been people who have worked as technicians, electricians, and moved into the supervisory kind of management oversight roles and been involved in the training. So they're going to take us through kind of their process. So with that in mind, I'm going to actually kick us off with a poll just to get to know our attendees here, getting a feel for what everyone here is kind of at in terms of their state of adoption or consideration of mobile. Got that coming up on your screen right there. If you could answer that, that would be great. The question here is, do you use mobile devices for your operations? Do you use them in your hospital right now? Your options are yes, and we love it. That's great. Yes, we do, but it's not all we thought it would be. We're not getting full adoption. No, but I wish we did. Either we're not ready, we don't have the budget, we don't have a solution that does it, or no, it's just not in the cards for us, not something we're looking at today. So if you could answer that for us, I'll share the results with you. Give it a minute or two just so we can get folks answering. And after this poll, we'll then dive into, I guess, looks like impersonating Shamika, sharing her notes, and Joe giving his perspective from Vidant. All right. So I love to see that only 6% of us are in the no, not for us, not in the cards for us, but absolutely understand that for some folks, it's just not there right now. Hopefully, as we go through this, you may pick up some tips and tricks on ways to organize your work, even if you can't use mobile. We've got 44% wishing they did. So hopefully this will kind of build that case for you. We also have teams that can talk with you about how to make that case to an executive or board level group on why an investment is valuable. We've got 20% saying yes, but it's not all we thought it would be. And as I said, that doesn't surprise me. We do see issues with people not either having the right technology in place or not having fully bought in staff. And I think that Joe in particular can give us some tips on how we go about that. And great to see that we've got a third of us, almost 31%, loving it. That's fantastic. So thank you everyone for those results. Let's move in to some of the background pieces now. So we've done our poll, got the questions up there. The first one, and Joe, this is the first question for you. Wanted to get a feel for folks online of what technology is in place right now for you there at Vidant. So thinking about what software you're using beyond just the CMMS side, but including that, what hardware you've set up for your maintenance techs, and how long you've been using those. Joe, can you kick us off by sharing that, please?
Yes, sir. Great question. We started out, we've using mobile asset tracking for one, the pneumatic tube system, our building automation system, Bentley Redline, which takes our drawings, and we're using WorksHub finally for our CMMS once we got that in place. The hardware we use right now are iPads, or the guys will tend to use their cell phones most of the time because it's smaller, it's easier for them to take with them. It's not as bulky as the full-size iPads that we use. And we've been using these for about 10 years or so. We switched to the WorksHub about 3 years ago from a legacy system. So, and those are things we've been using so far.
Yeah, what I think is really interesting about, Joe, your experience is the length of time that you've been using this. So you've got a real depth of knowledge on what works and what doesn't. And also the idea of it's not just about one solution, it's that floor plan or the Brantley solution, so you can see those pieces. It's giving team members options on the hardware side. You've got the tablets, but we can also let people use things on phones so they can have something that's more kind of accustomed to them. On Shamika's side, I'm going to switch into sharing her notes. Of course, we've been working with them for a number of years. They're using the WorksHub on the mobile side, but they've also gone down this gradual path of layering additional applications onto their mobile devices. So they put on their access to their building automation software so that the techs can access that. They put on Zoom and WebEx for video sharing. They put Teams on there for chatting. They've got Adobe PDF for viewing floor plans, similar to what Joe is doing. From a hardware perspective, they took a slightly different approach in that, as I understand it, they standardized on the iPad minis, and that was picked by their IT team due to their internal network requirements. Some of the team members there did want smaller devices like phones, especially Shamika shared the supervisors and some of the electricians. As they traced that back, though, they found that it wasn't necessarily because they wanted the phone-sized device. It was because some of the issues they had when they first rolled this out were connectivity. Some of their, well, I'm sure everyone on this call can relate, maintenance areas are down in the basement, don't always get the best wireless connections. So what they invested in for some of those folks were 5G connected devices, which allowed them to basically have seamless coverage. And for the Franciscan missionaries, they started with us about 3 years ago. They did have a legacy solution in place, actually the same one that Joe was using, and they had that in place for about 5 years and switched for similar reasons to Joe. So that gives us kind of a baseline of where both Shamika and Joe were starting from. Let's talk a little bit next, Joe, about actually picking a solution. So kind of, I know that on your end, you were highly involved in this. For the participants here, can you share kind of the thought process you guys went through? What was important, what wasn't? You know, did you include facilities technicians in the review? How did that go about?
Well, when we first started looking at a solution, the legacy system that we had a server here in our IT system, and those guys took care of it. But every time they went to update it, you know, they'd have to get with us, we'd have to get with the company, and we'd run into errors on both sides. So we figured out it would be easier to use a cloud-based system. It took a little while to get us there, but once we understood that what a cloud-based system would do for us, we decided to run with that. So we went through a whole process of looking at different solutions. We wanted something that was current. It would be updated on the vendor side instead of on our IT side. And it's really easy to reach out and to use this because you're just, it's not an app, you're just looking at a website. We also used a single sign-on so we could determine whether or not somebody was still here. We could shut down their access if we needed to, or we can determine what kind of access or what kind of level they have of access. And my administrator and I went through a bunch of different solutions until we got to the Works Hub, and we found everything that it offered was what we were looking for.
And then Joe, in your review and how you were going through, I think you'd shared that the decision that you'd made was mainly kind of yourself and the facilities directors. You didn't really include the frontline technicians, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. We decided about what was best for them and just said, hey guys, just try this new software, because the legacy software, it had a lot of different pieces to it that didn't fit quite right. You had to be on the secured wireless network, and you know, a bunch of different things that just did not do what we needed to do. It was nowhere near as easy as what we have now.
Mm-hmm. And so kind of comparing that to Shamika's experience, they went about it a different way. And I think both of these options are interesting to think about if anyone's going down this journey. So they had the same kind of baseline requirements. They needed a solution that was web-based. They wanted to be able to work online and offline. The single sign-on piece to make sure that when a staff member left the organization, couldn't still get in, was important. Another thing that was really key for them, because of some issues they had with their legacy system, was the ability to share devices between staff. With their older system, things were locked down. So if that device was signed out to me, only I could use it. It wasn't like Joe could pick it up and log in and see his work orders. So they needed something that was easier. They did part of what Biden and Joe did, in that they basically vetted the solutions and picked them, but then they actually layered in a level of involvement for the maintenance techs. So they actually picked 2 team members with the least experience in technology and included them in the review. It meant that things took longer in terms of their review process and actually selecting things. But for them, that was a key piece because their techs had not bought into the previous solution. So they wanted them to be bought in. In my experience, having done this literally thousands of times, both options work. What's really important is what happens after the decision is made and how you engage and train with your staff. And this is where there are some great similarities, I think, between how Joe and Shamika encountered this. When you get into the actual training phase and introducing solutions like this to the team members, one of the keys is to not make it about time tracking, not make it something that is exclusively focused on logging where all the minutes go. If you do that, the whole rollout gets viewed at the front line as Big Brother watching over me. If you spin it into more focused on, we're looking to basically cut out the travel time so we don't have to move, try to come back to the shop, pick up work orders, make it easier for you to communicate with us what's happened, make it easier to log what's happened so we can showcase our successes, things like that. You'll get better adoption in the field. So once we've picked a solution, the next question is, of course, what's the workflow like? How does it work? So on this piece, Joe, I thought it would be interesting. We didn't talk a bunch about this, but I thought it would be interesting if you remember, I know this is going back a number of years, kind of what the workflow was like before mobile and what it's like afterwards in terms of how does the maintenance technician kind of pick up their job and how do they mark it as complete? Just to give people kind of that comparison of what it was like when you made that change. Can you share a little bit with us there?
Yeah, there are night and day differences. When we first started, they would submit a work order. Whoever's out on the floor would send us a work order. It would come down. We had a person sitting in the, our main office. They would take the work order, submit it to whichever shop would take care of it, send it to that person, or call them on the radio. And at some point in time during the day, they would come pick that work order up, go do the work, fill it out, bring it back, and then the technician or the person that was sitting at the desk would actually have to complete the work order, which, over time takes a whole lot of time. So now when we use the mobile solution, they call them on the radio and they'll let them know that they have a work order, and they can look through and find the work order that is submitted to them. They can go ahead and take care of it. If they're in the outlying buildings, the guys can go ahead and take care of 4 or 5 work orders that may come in instead of having to come all the way back to plant, pick up the paperwork order and walk back out there or drive. So it saves us a lot of time.
Yeah. When I talk to people about one of the major benefits of going mobile, it's that windshield time and cutting it down, especially if you've got satellite areas, but even if you've got your team members just in one kind of hospital building or one building. Shamika shared a great story with me around this, where when they first put in mobile solutions, they actually had a team member, I think it was, that measured their steps per day. Before mobile, they were at 20,000 steps a day. After mobile, they went down to 5,000 steps a day. Now, 20,000 steps a day is great from a health perspective. I don't want to take your exercise away from anybody, but when you think about 15,000 steps and how long that is, you're talking, I did some quick Googling on that, it's about 7 miles, at a reasonable pace, not running from work order to work order, kind of at like an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes of walking time in someone's day. And that's across multiple technicians. So for every person not using mobile, you could be losing up to an hour and a half of productivity a day. Think about how many extra work orders you can do. That was one of the big drivers for the Franciscan team when they were looking at this from a mobile perspective, really looking at how they could kind of optimize that. Joe, thank you for the background on that and the comparison. I think that gives some good insight for folks. Taking it to the next stage, implementing. Thinking about kind of if we've got a solution in place, how do we actually get our staff on board? Can you talk to us about how you trained your staff, how long it took, what the hardest part was, or anything that you would even change if you were doing this again?
When we first started out, we had your guys come and train us for, I think it was 2 or 3 days, almost 8 hours at a time. The guys sat in, they saw exactly how it worked. They got to get on the iPads, the ones that we could get on there at the time. We got them on there and got them trained. And then from that point, once our staff started to turn over, I would start to train them at least an hour at a time. They would come in, sit down with me. I would get them the iPads, get it configured, everything that we needed to do on our security side, and then I would sit down and explain to guys how it worked or how the system works. Then I would also tell them, hey, once you get out on the floor, you have other teammates that'll sit there and show you what works best for them. And that's kind of a key piece, a really good thing for them to learn is what makes it easier for somebody else to do, to kind of pay attention and take that with them. Sorry. And if they work with them, the more they use it, the more comfortable they'll get with it. It's not very hard to use. It's just the day-to-day. Select this field, and just keep moving forward. It's a great program, though.
And I think one of the things that you shared with me before that was so important was getting guys to help each other, right?
Yes.
Like
to get each member to show them where the fields were and how to select this and what, coming from that legacy system, there were not as many fields you had to kind of select, but now to tailor your better reports, you have to have better information going in. So as long as they're putting the correct thing in there, then you get better detailed reports.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I again, having looked at feels like millions of work orders, the accuracy of the information that goes in has a huge impact on the ability to report on it. So something as simple as how you implement mobile and train staff to categorize a work order will change what happens essentially on the reporting side. And then, Joe, I need to get this one out there. I think you shared with me that you do have some folks who still call the iPad something else because it's been branded with you now. Well, can you tell us that story?
Yeah, instead of being called iPads, they call them the Joe Pads because I was the one to implement it way back when.
And I think that that's the fun stuff that you can do to personalize it. It doesn't have to be formal, like let's sit down and train. When you're doing, your training, make it fun and give people the chance to make mistakes. That's the other thing that I've seen. Some of the notes that Shamika had shared with me on this were, first off, when they talked about implementing, big thing for them was getting people involved up front. So, on the kind of initial decision page, they include those two people we talked about before who weren't that tech savvy. Interesting note on those two folks, they actually became some of their best users because they were fully bought in. Now, what Shamika also did was actually add to that group one of her best folks on a technician level from a technology perspective, because she knew that she wouldn't be able to train everyone herself. Got a pretty big team there. She knew she needed some support. So she had the two kind of starting people, one more experienced person from using a smartphone, stuff like that, rolled it out with them, and then used them as the showcase. Still did most of the training herself, but had them there to support people. Another key thing was to not turn this into something that was stressful for the frontline techs who had been there for a long time. They had, and as many organizations, Joe, I'm sure you have this too, have maintenance staff who have been with them 10, 15, 20 years, who did great work, but technology wasn't what their experience was in. It wasn't what they were hired for. So she wanted to make sure that no one was worried about their job, that they weren't worried about the distractions of can I use this new thing? So she had a rule where she was like, as long as somebody's learning something new every day, and it can be super basic, we're good. We're taking it step by step. It might take a little longer, but I've got good people and I don't want anyone to be left behind. So she had that guideline of as long as you're learning one new thing, and that one new thing could be as simple as, how do I hit the start button to start my timer? How do I close a work order? How do I log notes? How do I update the status? One new thing, practice it, get good at it, and you're there. And that really helped them with their adoption. I don't want to speak for her, but I think in terms of the hardest part, it was probably pacing people's expectations. Just the fact that some people wanted to go faster, some people wanted to go a little bit slower. So getting people onto a common speed just so that everybody was in the same area. Another one that Shamika shared as a key kind of learning for her was whenever they do something new, they make sure that some of the maintenance staff can actually train other people. So they go to some of their, I'm not going to say weaker folks, but less experienced folks, walk them through it, have them train someone else, because in the training of someone else, you get real learning. You make sure that that concept is solidified and that person understands it. So every time Shamika creates something new, whether it's a new form, a new process, a new PM with extra steps in it, she actually takes it through and teaches one of the guys and then have them teach it to someone else to make sure that it's very well understood. Joe, on your side, anything you would change if you were to do it again on the implementation side?
To be honest with you, it went pretty smoothly. The only problem I had wasn't a training side. It was to get all the rooms that we have in this facility into the system. That was a monumental task. And you have to do that correctly and be able to put, for us to go back and look at a work order that's in the same room or something like that, you have to put that specific work or that room in there for for reports or finding it. Our legacy system didn't do that. You had to you could freeform what the work or what the room number was. And this system is great because it takes care of that for us.
Yeah, location sounds like a really easy thing, and it becomes integral to your reporting. It's almost like the hierarchy of what's where becomes really key. We learned that early on and find that that's one of the pieces whenever you're starting with a new CMMS or work management system, you want to put some good thought into and make sure that when you set up those locations, you think about what your frontline staff call those areas. This really matters on mobile. It matters for your requesters as well, but I've seen systems that get set up with architectural floor plan numbers, which is fine if that's what's on the actual room as like a nameplate or number plate. But if no one in the organization other than two people who use those floor plans know what those room numbers are and they're not on the room numbers, that's going to be a disaster. You're going to have staff not know where things are, get confused. I mean, it can be pretty frustrating for people. So that is something to watch for. All right. So moving on, we've got staff live. One of the things that I think matters, of course, to everyone when it comes to working in a hospital environment is the compliance side. We've got documentation requirements that we have to follow through on. We've got the reports that we have to have. We've got to make sure that things are done on the right frequency. Joe, when we talked about this, I think you shared some basic ideas around, how compliance and mobile had kind of helped each other, not necessarily in doing the rounds themselves. I know you guys haven't adopted that, but more on kind of the making sure no work was missed, the reporting. Can you talk to us a little bit about how it's helped there?
Yes, in the work hub system, there's actually a box that you can check to turn on anything that is Joint Commission required. It'll have all the EPs, everything listed, things that you would not even think about most of the time, like just a certain door or something like that. You turn that on, or lighting or anything like that, you turn it on and it gives you all these EPs and references. So if you ever have a question, you can go back and pull those reports and say, okay, show me this EP, what ties into it, what piece of equipment, what do I need to report, that kind of thing. And it'll pull all this stuff up for you, and you can just put it in a book and binder and hand it to the Joint Commission.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the keys that we found when looking at work that's being done. Sometimes our staff doesn't realize what is compliance related when it's something that might be more ad hoc. not necessarily scheduled work order where we know, every time I do the generator test, there's a compliance checklist on this. But there are other things that come up on an ad hoc basis that we might not realize. So feeding that information to people basically makes their job easier. We also found, and this was some stuff that Shamika had shared, that the idea of using mobile to document all of the work that happened made sure that things weren't missed and that they had the full history. Now, I can go on a full diatribe myself about, the difference between printed documentation and digital documentation and the need for us as an industry from a compliance perspective to evolve more to accepting digital documentation. But it's not up to me. It's up to individual surveyors, and they all have their own experiences and their own desires, and even hospitals have their own kind of wishes there. So I haven't seen a big drive to a full mobile compliance, I should say full compliance digital strategy. But what we have found is with Shamika, the creation of the checklists within the mobile piece, so we make sure jobs are happening and the right procedures, and then B, the ability to print those off and then store those in the binder. Similar, Joe, to I think what you're doing, where you have a paper binder that you print stuff off to, not every work order, but all the compliance ones. Do I remember that right? You still got that binder there?
Yes, sir. We've got a bunch of them.
Yeah. It's never just one. So on the compliance side, if I had to distill that down, I would say, think about here the value of making sure that jobs are happening at the right time, that you've got clarity on who's doing what, and that if something is missed, people have the reminders right in the palm of their hand. That's, I think, the biggest piece on the compliance side. Next chunk would be general outcomes. There's a whole ton of kind of benefits that we get from this, from having talked to lots of people doing this. I know they vary from increases in productivity, cost savings, faster response time, meaning we're getting to work sooner, improving the communication when something can't happen. How do we communicate that to the frontline staff and even more engaged facilities techs? Joe, if you think about the journey you've been on for facilities, can you share with us kind of what the impacts were for you, what the payoff was?
Sure, especially when we first started. We started with our outline facilities guys, which were the guys that were having to come drive their trucks, park in the back. They would go get a work order, go back out into the field, do the work, and then come back and complete it. So we saved huge amounts of times with those guys being able to stay in the field, complete work orders, start new work orders. If they were in the field and somebody said, hey, there's a light out over here, they could take care of it right there. So it saves so much time and so much effort. And they completed their own work orders. So that freed up the person that was sitting at the desk to be able to push the work orders out to who needed the work order. When they come in, that technician or that person actually submits those work orders to the technicians, and it freed them up a lot of time. We can catch duplicates more easy too. When they come in, you see a duplicate keeps coming in from the same room. We could also turn around and tell the person that's sending them or the next person, hey, we're working on it. We've got somebody en route to pick it up right now. We could also make sure people weren't hoarding supplies because we know where stuff should be, assets and those kind of things. And we had a big drop in our complaints about, how quickly we responded. And because we have close to 80 technicians, so they're moving all the time.
Yeah, with the 80 technicians, one of the most frustrating complaints I've gotten is the person who complains about something really simple like a light out that's been out for 2 days, but there's like 6 others in the room. It's not a life safety issue. And they say, well, I saw Jimmy in the back shed having a smoke. It's like, yeah, but did you know he was here at 3 in the morning trying to fix the boiler because we didn't have any heat or we didn't have air conditioning? that visibility, the lack of it when we don't have something that shares the actual info of what is happening with people's works can lead to their complaints.
Yes, and we were also able to take pictures to add to the work order so that we could follow up and, we could say this is the light that we worked on, or this is the ceiling tile that I changed, so that it would cut down on a lot of the issues that we were running into.
Yep. Do you guys ever take pictures when you get a request and you're like, I can't even find what the problem is? You take a picture of the thing that's working fine and say, everything's working here, so I don't know what's wrong. Do you even tell us the right room? You ever see that happen? Yeah.
Yeah, we had that before, and now that we can tie it into and say this is the exact room and then take the picture and tie the two together, they can walk right to it and take care of the issue.
Seen big stuff there. And on Shamika's side, I shared, the story she'd given us about the huge drop in travel time, saving them because of that 20,000 steps to 5,000 steps, about an hour and a half per person per day. They also had a previous process where they used to print off all of their work orders because they were on paper. They would pass them to the maintenance technician who would go and do the job. That person would bring it back, and that paper copy would get filed in big filing cabinets that they would keep going back. I can't remember if it was like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, but they had a whole bunch of these. When they went mobile, they stopped printing all of those work orders. And they actually had to do a project at the same time to look at where they had found cost savings. They came up with the idea of looking at paper, and they found that they were spending $1,000 a month less on paper once they went mobile, because there was no printed work order. There was no need to have someone pass it back and forth. It was all digital. And the few things that they were printing off were the summary type reports for their compliance binders. So instead of, a work order printed for every single corrective job and every PM, they were cutting it down to 1/100th of that or something like that. Another big improvement for them was on the productivity side from reporting. So they used to have to, even though they had a CMS, it didn't let them search the way they needed. So if they needed to look up the history of something, they would have to go to those metal binders and search the paper files to find that work order. Big pain, huge time loss. The admin workload that they were under, so she actually had 3 people whose job it was to manage issuing work orders, marking them as complete, and answering questions. That's 3 people. Now, I'm talking 3 hospitals, 4 million square feet. It wasn't small, but because of the volume of work, it was taking them 2 to 3 weeks to get work orders completed in the system. Work orders were piling up on the admin's desk. Now, because they went mobile, the maintenance staff can complete work orders themselves. They can tap a complete button, and there's no admin job, so huge time savings there, and work orders are done same day. And because the frontline staff could see when things were marked as complete and it was happening in real time, they saw, just like you, Joe, their complaints drop. They were able to take that admin time and actually focus it on things that aligned more with their strategic initiatives, things that they could, actually do to improve how the department was running, instead of just being people who mark work orders as complete. Another really interesting thing Shamika had shared was workload balancing. So because of how work orders print off in many different systems, when you get a whole bunch at once, you can feel overwhelmed. And they had this happening on their end. They had maintenance staff who were coming in and getting a whole ton of work orders at the beginning of the month. They would complain about feeling overworked, feeling stressed. When they actually started tracking with mobile how long those jobs took, they found, and forgive me, Shamika's not here, but I think it was around like 30 or 40 hours per person in a month So it wasn't, 160 hours and it was every day and you're overworked. But what was happening, they discovered, because of this time tracking piece, and then when they realized that it wasn't an overwhelming number of hours, what they traced it back to was they had everything popping up at the very beginning of the month. So you would come in on the 1st and have 100 jobs there for you. Those 100 jobs didn't have to be done on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. They were just PMs for the month. So Shamika restructured it, lowered the number of work orders that came in on the 1st of the month, moved some to the 2nd week, some to the 3rd week, some to the 4th week, spread them out. And the guys actually came to her afterwards and said they really appreciated how she had lightened their workload. They felt that the volume of work was less and all she had done was spread it out so they weren't getting overwhelmed. That led to happier staff, more engaged people, and the ability to actually do more. And the final thing that she had shared was about staff being self-starters. When information is warehoused and it's just accessible to the director or the coordinators, the managers or the supervisors and the staff who are out there actually doing the work don't have the ability to look information up themselves and solve problems themselves. So when they put this mobile piece in place, they were then able to actually have the staff check on things themselves. So if a work order was sitting out there for a month and they were on it along with a contractor, they could say, hey, what's happening with this contract? Did anybody call them to come in? And with that change, they had a big drop in the number of work orders that were outsourced that took longer than, I think it was a month to finish. They had previous instances where contractors would forget about jobs, the admin staff were overworked, they wouldn't notice. By enabling the frontline staff to be self-starters and look at them themselves, they were able to pull forward some of that work and deliver better service. So big improvements there. So last piece before we get to actual questions, Joe, what tips do you have for people if they're thinking about mobile, if they're in that cohort of people who wish they could get more out of mobile or don't have it yet but want to do it? What tips would you give them?
I would say the best thing to do is partner with somebody in your information services department to make sure you're getting the best mobile solution that you can get, because those guys are really sharp on the information that they use. Partner with them, test it out, and make sure it's the best thing that you guys can use. Then once you do that, have your maintenance techs figure out what they want to use before you start. Get IT's blessing, have devices lined up, all that kind of thing. And then when you're having training, make sure you're sitting there and have somebody that's with your guys so they kind of understand what's going on and can ask questions, because they have that unique perspective that they'll ask from the way things look to them or how things are done in their day-to-day workforce that aren't necessarily done by somebody that creates a CMMS. So if you put those two pieces together, you kind of help them understand how it works.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, getting the involvement of frontline folks and getting kind of technical people, but also non-technical people giving feedback. Because at the end of the day, a solution like mobile is only successful if our hands-on maintenance facilities technicians use it. If they don't, we're no better than with paper. We just got a different set of problems. And I think that one of the things, Joe, that Shamika had shared that was perfectly in line with you, the idea of know who your staff are, know your team. If you know someone is going to struggle, spend more time with them up front. Don't treat it as everybody gets 30 minutes of training and that's it. You'll have people who can pick things up in 15 minutes. You have some people who it might take 2 hours. Allot your training time accordingly. And the other suggestion was pair people up. So a buddy system, get people who have technology skills and those who might be newer to it, and buddy them up so they help each other. I used to talk about this as give your, buddy your more experienced or your older maintenance techs with your younger ones. That's ageist, I've learned. We're learning and getting better all the time. I have actually found that some of the older maintenance techs I've had the privilege of working with are really great at picking it up, and some of the younger guys need that help. So don't kind of take your training and put an age bias filter on it. Think about what they actually use. Are they using a mobile device now? And pair people up who aren't. And that key is all part of improving the adoption. So those are some notes that Shamika had shared with us. From my perspective, having been involved in many, many deployments, back when I started, I've been doing mobile deployments with people. I haven't done them in a little while, but I was doing these way back in 2005, I think, 2004. We came out with a Windows mobile device and had a little stylus. But the big things that I had from that training and what I learned was don't focus on anything related to Big Brother when you're talking to your maintenance staff. It's not the biggest benefit of the system. It certainly is there. Yes, we track time and it gives us an idea, but the bigger benefits are the improved communication, the ability to cut out travel time, the ability to get better documentation. Focus on those and your team members will be much more engaged. They'll be much more likely to pick this up and run with it. And if someone struggles in the beginning, talk to them about what the real problem is. Ask them to walk you through how they're adding something. Sometimes when people play with stuff themselves, they come up with some weird and wacky way of doing things. We give you videos to make it really simple and training and support, but with all that stuff and support in the world, you still get people who come up with their own ways. So when you do see someone struggling, ask them to walk you through how they're doing it and go back to the basics. So with that in mind, wanted to switch to the Q&A side. We've got the Q&A button down at the bottom. If you could click in the Q&A piece and write in any questions, Joe and I will answer them for you. I do have, well, we already answered one live actually. I've got another question teed up for us, Joe. This one for you. If you could talk about it a little bit more. With mobile, has there been an improvement in interdepartmental communication, kind of between maintenance and nursing or any departments like that?
Yes, and especially with the piece where you can get them to have signatures. You can write down a signature and say you go to one place and this one nurse always says that, hey, they didn't change out the light that I'm talking about. Well, because it's like a huge room or something. Yeah, you go up to that one place, the guy replaces the light bulb. It might not be the same one she's talking about. Once they finally figure that out, you can get that nurse to sign that iPad or sign in there where it says the signature box. That way you know, okay, she's satisfied that the work is done and the technician is satisfied that the work is done, and it clears up a lot of confusion.
Mm-hmm. What about another question here? I talked about that age piece, but someone has asked, in your experience, did you see a difference in the technology adoption across different kind of experience levels or age groups amongst your technicians?
I think some of the younger technicians, when they come in, they're more used to using a phone because it's right on their side. They use that a lot more than they use the iPad itself because it's bigger and bulkier. So they just grab it, take off, do their work, come right back, and they're done. And that's about the only thing that we've seen.
Joe, on your side, what have you found being, if you had to pick one thing as the best improvement from the mobile side, what's that been for you?
The best improvement, I would say that would be the location. the locations really help us out a lot more than what we did before.
Okay.
Having that
now,
piece there.
That piece there integrated in, nice. Now we did get one question, which was how do you handle this in line with the new POPI Act? I believe we're talking protection of personal information. I know that's I think the South African version of the EU's GDPR, the right to be forgotten and stuff like that. For that individual, that's a more technical question. We can table that. I'll be honest, I'm not an expert at the South African version, but I know on the GDPR side, we've built some stuff in there. So happy to reach out and answer that one. Looks like, Joe, we've done a great job on the presentation because I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. Joe, I wanted to thank you for the great input and feedback you've given us. I do have one other poll, if we could put that up there, asking folks if they're interested in learning more about how we can help you on your journey to going mobile or some of the benefits. We're happy to talk about how to pitch this to others. We know that it's not always those on the call who actually are the ones that have to kind of sign off on investments in the technology side. We've done a great job working on the pitch, if you will. But again, Joe, your contribution, as always, very much appreciated. I also want to thank Shamika for the work she put in prepping for this. I couldn't have done it without the notes that she had shared with me. I do apologize for the unavoidable weather conditions that meant she couldn't join us. It does mean that there is way more information out there, of course. As we go, as you saw in the beginning, there'll be a recording available from this, and you can always reach out to us if there are questions. So we'll leave that hold up for a little bit, and then once that's done, wish you all a wonderful rest of your week and a happy September now that it's here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Josh and Joe and Dude Solutions for sponsoring this event. Just a reminder, like Josh mentioned, we will be sending out an archive and your CEU information for participating in today's event. So thank you again, and we hope to see you at our next event. Have a wonderful day, everyone.